one question can stop you mid-stride. Not because it's complicated, but because somewhere in your body, you already know the answer, and you've been avoiding it. Welcome to One Question, a short, weekly reflection to help you reconnect with your body, your values, and your truth. This week's question is, what emotion have you been treating as a problem to solve? Earlier this week, I felt rage. Not irritation, not frustration, rage. The kind that arrives without warning, that burns in your chest and your throat, that makes you feel like your body is too small to contain what's moving through it, about what's happening in the world, things I can't control. And my first instinct, almost before I'd even fully registered what I was feeling, was to shut it down, to manage it, to find a way to make it stop so I could get back to being functional, calm, useful. I caught myself doing that. And instead I made a different choice. I gave the feeling some space. I didn't perform it. I didn't catastrophize. I just let it be there. Let myself actually feel the thing I was feeling in my body without immediately trying to fix it or redirect it or turn it into something more socially acceptable. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I didn't do all the things that my body was calling for because I didn't want to scare the neighbors. But I did let myself sit with it, and I let tears come, and I let myself really feel it. And then once it had moved through me, because emotions do move when we let them, I worked on regulating my nervous system. I came back to myself. I felt calmer, more grounded. I felt okay. It wasn't totally gone, but it was regulated. What struck me afterward was this. I have spent a lot of my life treating difficult emotions as problems to be solved, and I suspect I'm not alone in that. We are not taught how to feel. That sounds like a strange thing to say because feelings seem like the most natural thing in the world. But what most of us were taught, explicitly or implicitly, at home or at school or just by watching the adults around us, was how to manage our emotions, how to keep them at an appropriate size, how to return to equilibrium as quickly as possible. Or maybe we were shown how to let our emotions just run rampant and cause destruction, and so we learned how to manage them. Emotions like rage or grief or disgust or deep disappointment, these are often treated as malfunctions, as evidence that something has gone wrong that needs to be corrected. But here's what neuroscience tells us. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, one of the world's leading emotion researchers, describes emotions not as reactions that happen to us, but as constructions, our brain's best guess about what's happening in our body and in the world, designed to help us respond. Isn't that fascinating? Emotions are, in her framework, information. They are the body's way of communicating that something matters, something is happening. When we treat them as problems, we stop the lines of communication. And the emotions don't just disappear. The research consistently shows that emotional suppression, the deliberate attempt to inhibit feeling or expression, doesn't reduce the emotional experience. It amplifies the physiological arousal. The emotion then stays in the body looking for somewhere to go. Oof, yikes. There's a concept in psychology called affect labeling. This is the simple act of naming what you're feeling. I say simple as though it's actually simple. Studies by psychologist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA found that when we name an emotion, activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, think, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the activity in the amygdala decreases just by naming it. What the hell? The prefrontal cortex, which governs reasoning and regulation, becomes more engaged. In other words, naming what you feel doesn't intensify it. It creates a small but significant separation between you and the feeling. It's like just enough room to breathe, just enough oxygen to give yourself a beat, a moment. This is different from analyzing the emotion, different from explaining it away or turning it into a story. It's something simpler and more physical. I am feeling rage. This is rage. And this is what rage feels like in my body. Oh, the naming alone begins to shift things. And then there is the question of regulation. Not suppression, but regulation. These are not the same thing. Suppression says this feeling should not exist. Regulation says I can hold this feeling and still function. I can feel it without becoming consumed by it. Practices like breathwork, somatic movement, grounding through your senses, EFT tapping, these aren't ways of bypassing emotion. They're ways of creating enough safety in the nervous system that the emotion can complete its cycle, that it can move through as it was always designed to do on its communication path. There are emotions most of us find particularly hard to allow. Rage is one. We are taught, especially I think as women, that rage is destructive, dangerous, and unseemly, that it makes us difficult, that it signals a loss of control that we should be ashamed of. But rage is often a boundary that has been crossed so many times that the quiet signals went unheard. Rage is often grief with nowhere to go. It is, at its core, a deep signal that something matters to us, that we have values, that we care, and that we are paying attention to the world around us. Disgust is another. We tend to want to move away from it quickly. It feels primitive, animal, uncomfortable. But disgust is one of the oldest emotional systems in the body, and it evolved to protect us from harm. When it arises in response to injustice or cruelty, as it often does, it is telling us something about moral sensibility, about what we cannot tolerate, about what we believe human beings deserve. So watch yourself when you are hearing a story and your face wrinkles up almost as though you smell something rotten. That's disgust looking a way to move. Disappointment is perhaps the quietest of the difficult emotions and one of the most common. I know I felt this one. It lives in the gap between what we had hoped for and what actually happened. We often try to resolve it quickly, to reframe it, to find the silver lining, and to move on. But unprocessed disappointment accumulates. It becomes a kind of low-grade grief that colors everything, that makes us less willing to hope the next time. What all of these emotions share is this. They are pointing to something real, something that matters. And when we treat them as problems to solve, we miss the message. I want to bring this back to the body because this is where it becomes practice rather than theory. Every emotion has a physical signature. Rage has heat, constriction and pressure. Grief has heaviness, that kind of ache behind your sternum. Disappointment has this sort of deflation, the going quiet in the chest. Disgust can arrive as nausea, as pulling away, as a tightening of the throat. Even joy feels a certain way and has a certain physical signature. And if we're afraid of joy, it will show up in the body. When you feel a difficult emotion, can you locate it in your body before you try to do anything with it? Can you simply notice it without judgment, without agenda? Where does it live? What does it feel like? This is not indulgence. It's not weakness. It is, in fact, a form of intelligence. You don't have to sit with an overwhelming emotion alone or indefinitely. You don't have to go to the most painful place all at once. But you might begin to ask, what would it mean to let this feeling be here for like 30 seconds? To stop trying to manage it, just briefly, and simply notice it. So, this week's question is, what emotion have you been treating as a problem to solve? Take a moment with it, not to analyze, but just to notice. Is there something you've been suppressing, keeping at arm's length, redirecting, explaining away? What would it mean to just let it be there? Not forever, not without support, but just enough to let it speak, to hear what it's trying to tell you. And then, gently, kindly, help your nervous system find its way back to grounded. Thank you for joining me for one question. If something came up during this reflection, something that felt surprising or it surfaced and you noticed that you want to push it away, That's not a problem. That is information. That is data. What emotion have you been treating as a problem to solve? Until next week, be kind to yourself, trust your body, and always ask better questions.